So I got permission from one of my subscribers to share some dialogue he and I have had regarding the meaning and implications of what, in effect, is the last chapter of Shinran's Kyogawa Shinsho, where he addresses the question of transformed Buddha bodies and lands. To be honest, when I was reciting excerpts from the Kyogawa Shinsho, I didn't recite elements from that chapter, but I plan to go back and do that because, frankly, partly as a result of my dialogue with Jason, as well as through the recitation that I've been doing of the introductory commentaries regarding this last chapter of the Kyogawa Shinsho that are embedded within this second volume of the two-volume work on the writings of Shinran. I've gained a better appreciation for the content of that chapter and the implications of it, again, particularly in terms of the 19th and 20th vows that Dharmakara made when he was a bodhisattva before he became a Amida Buddha. So anyhow, Jason, he says, "Hi, John. Something I've been wondering about for a while now that you may be able to help me with. The 18th, 19th, and 20th vows seem to be talked about a bit later in the larger Pure Land Sutra as three groups of aspirants. The way it reads, it comes across as three different ways that these aspirants attained birth in the Pure Land. Yes, faith was a key part of their birth, but the way it comes across is that so also was their devotional practices, meditational practices, virtuous deeds, as well as those who were reborn by faith alone. Sort of comes across as an all-inclusive thing, rather than a, quote, faith only and nothing else idea, as Shinran talks about. I'm not as familiar with Shinran's writings as I imagine you are, so I was wondering whether you could possibly help me out here on understanding this." So, to be honest, I didn't feel quite as capable of or knowledgeable about Shinran and his writings as what Jason gives me credit for, but I responded back saying, "Hey, Jason, excellent question. Now, you give me more credit than I deserve for understanding Shinran, but I did some research, and I think I have some input that will be useful." Shinran interpreted the 18th as being the vow that meant faith alone was needed, and even that, of course, being given by Amida. He saw the other two as being related to aspiration for the Pure Land, but involving some degree of self-power in terms of either practices like meditating on Amida or on repeating the Nembutsu over and over. This particular video, the one where this commentary was going on, which is the one called Intro to Shinran's Teaching, Practice, and Realization, Part 21, regarding three types of religious experience, this particular video, where we were having this dialogue, touches on this concept, but the next two that I do on Shinran's conception of means and on the path of sages and non-Buddhist teachings will flesh this out more. And those two videos, one of which is now up, again, are drawn from this volume 2 of this wonderful set regarding Shinran's writings, these being commentaries about the Kyogawa Shinsho. I went on to say, "That said, I had recalled this issue being addressed in the Shinshu Saiten volume, published by the Buddhist Churches of America, and I got that book a long time ago. It probably you can still get a copy. It's got a red cover that's of some kind of plastic material that peels off. And I did something last night that my sweetheart, who's a bit of a bibliophile to say the least, probably would frown upon, as well as perhaps some devotees of different sects within Buddhism, as I tore that red cover off and basically put postage tape on it so that I could more easily manipulate it. But it's about this thick. You can see how thick it is, and it has within it just a treasury of material regarding the three sutras, Shinran's writings, etc., etc. But it also has commentaries explaining Jodo Shinshu teachings. And so, again, it was published by the BCA, and when I looked through it last night, I told Jason, sure enough, they had an explicit explanation which I will recite and upload. Now, I have recited it, but I haven't uploaded it, so you can look for that if you're interested in this topic. So I will make these three the next three videos I do. You can comment on those and ultimately tell me if you still have questions. If so, we can explore them together. To me, and this is really the point of this whole video, I said to me, the interesting aspect is that Shinran seemed to not only view these as paths for different aspirants, but also as the paths that he himself traveled in order to finally end up with his feeling and conviction that his Shinjin was a function of the pure grace of other power. And I went on to say, frankly, I myself also experienced a similar progression back in 1979-80 as I was drawn from a self-power orientation to a Pure Land approach. So stay tuned, my friend, and I will keep this as the focus of my channel for the next three videos. Namo Minabutsu. So again, the 19th, as I understand it now, is a Pure Land approach, but it's one where there are various meditative and non-meditative practices that are engaged in on a self-power basis. And the 20th is again one where the aspirant looks to and wishes to be reborn in the Pure Land, but where he or she, in order to, quote, accomplish that or attain that rebirth, feels like they need to repeat the Nembutsu over and over and over again multiple times, okay? So these were, as I would characterize it, precursors of Shinran's interpretation of the 18th vow, and were more consistent with what I would think of as the Jodo-Shu school, or the Pure Land school of Honen, and also those prior to Honen, the earlier patriarchs within Shin Buddhism, who over time refined more and more toward other power and away from self-power, with Shinran having brought this to its ultimate fruition, if you will, in the form of his interpretation of the 18th vow. But at a personal level, I have to tell you, I started, okay, the religious conversion experience, spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it, and focusing on various mystical traditions, etc., ended up feeling like Mahayana Buddhism was, you know, the best from my perspective in terms of resonating with what made sense to me. And of course, the Lotus Sutra was a big part of what I studied at that time, along with Prajnaparamita Sutras, Lankavatara, etc. But the point is, through study of the lotus, and then the idea within the lotus of the eternal Buddha, and my contact with an elderly woman in my community who was a Pure Land Buddhist and did paintings of Amida and all like that, which was just amazing that I met Lucille, because I was in a small town, you know, back in 1979. The point being, then I got turned on to Pure Land, and then while I was, in a sense, aspiring to rebirth in the Pure Land and becoming a devotee of Amida, continued to feel like there were various, what are called in the scriptures, meditative and non-meditative practices, including having, and I'll tell you this in the vein of self-disclosure, if you've watched this video this far, is that, you know, I pulled back from a lot of my professional work and really devoted an incredible amount of time simply focused on Amida Buddha and reciting what in effect was the Nembutsu. I think at that time I would say it in terms of Nama Amida Buddha, something along that line. But again, it was a while before I realized that, you know, Amida didn't require that of me. That there were no requirements at all with respect to my own calculation and self-power, as Shinran would put it, and that I was totally blessed with the grace of Amida in having extended to me this gift of Shinjin, or true and trusting in Amida and the vow that he made to assure that I was grasped, never to be abandoned. So then going on, Jason replied and said, "Thank you ever so much for your reply. I will definitely look forward to those videos." And he does self-disclosure here and saying, "In just the short few months since I got started in this, I can certainly see in myself that unless it is all Amida doing this, I haven't got a prayer, LOL. Even where it comes to the kind of, quote, deep and trusting or settled faith that is required, I feel it has all come from Amida. I can't explain it, but so far it's felt like a natural process that has occurred rather than something contrived or forced where it comes to the faith bit. It's hard to explain. Also, I've had the ever-increasing strong feeling that the Nembutsu really covers all the other practices in one go, thus leaving me very much feeling that I do not need to practice anything else. The Nembutsu is everything. So I'm not disagreeing with Shinran. I just don't know what to do with what he says in the larger Pure Land Sutra, and for that matter, what it says in the Contemplation Sutra about the two other groups of aspirants. Because there they are, annoyingly perhaps, with their various practices and virtuous deeds having had some sort of contribution to their rebirth in the Pure Land too. So I'm very keen to hear some sort of explanation for this, believe me. One thought that did occur to me, though, maybe what they did was more out of gratitude than an attempt to contribute to their rebirth. And of course, when we Shin Buddhists say the Nembutsu, that's exactly what we're doing. It's not to gain anything, it's to express gratitude for what we've been given. Anyhow, I responded to that. I said, regarding your comment about I can't explain it, I said, neither can I, Jason. It is beyond conceptual understanding. That is one key sense in which the Shinshu approach is consistent with the Mahayana as a whole. Your degree of confusion and or dissonance may be reduced by not feeling so obliged to focus on the literal content of the Sukhavati Sutras and more on Shinran's interpretation. It was his genius that articulated the, quote, pure grace notion, which I believe to be the ultimate refinement and pinnacle of the Mahayana, consistent with the intent of the Lotus Sutra. So anyhow, then I uploaded the second video in this series of commentaries on the last chapter of the Kyougao Shinsho, and it's called Intro to Shinran's Teaching, Practice, and Realization, Part 22, Shinran's Conception of Means. And as a result of that upload, Jason said, "Aha, I think I understand." And I said, "Cool. It will become even clearer as you listen to the next two that I upload. My thought is that you yourself are being drawn gradually but surely toward the promise of the 18th, the primal vow of Dharmakara Bodhisattva Mahasattva. In some real sense, if we are open to it, I think it is a natural process. As we come to an increasingly clear realization regarding the futility of calculation and self-effort as it pertains to our spiritual development." And Jason said, "I completely agree with you. I think that's exactly what's happening too. Interestingly enough, Christianity has a very similar line of thought. The idea there is fleshed out in Paul's letters, that the law of Moses was actually designed to show absolute impossibility of human beings being capable of reaching the very high standards given in the law, thus the need for grace alone through other power." And those of you who have listened to some of my videos where I sort of rant about my own perspectives on Buddhism and on spirituality and religiosity will recognize the fact that my perspective also is that Buddhism doesn't have a corner on the market when it comes to, spiritual truth. Although I do think that, Buddhism has more texts and commentaries and Dharma masters to explain some of these things in clearer terms, knowing that no words or terms can explain anything in an ultimate way, than do other religions, where, you would never find, for example, just to give a sort of off-topic sidebar comment triggered by Jason's mentioning of Christianity, I've been asked to give a talk on Buddhism to a couple of classes at a local community college, the classes on world religions, and I got hold of their textbook. And even in the textbook, which is a pretty standard mainstream kind of document, the author was making the point that, all of you are familiar, for example, with the Buddhist notion of the raft, and we give up the raft once we've got to the other shore. And also the fact in the Diamond Sutra that, the Buddha says basically he didn't teach anything. Well, can you imagine that kind of statement within a Christian framework? It's just a very different kind of depth as far as the extent to which Buddhism, even within its mainstream kinds of forms, as opposed to a more mystical, esoteric form, acknowledges the limitations associated with words and concepts. Anyhow, that's another story. Maybe I'll share the PowerPoint I developed for that little presentation at some point in a video. But here's what I said to Jason. I said, do I have your permission to read our dialogue in a video at some point without identifying you as other than, quote, one of my subscribers? And he said, oh, absolutely. I don't mind at all. And if it makes it easier for you, I don't mind if you mention my name. So I say, thank you, Jason. Thank you, all my subscribers. I hope there's something of use in this video. And I wish each of you well in exploring your own journey as you study and reflect upon and practice various aspects of the Buddha Dharma. Namo Mita Butch. Namo Mita Butch. Namo Mita Butch.